Over the last, I guess the last term, if you've been around here at all, in Big Kids Church, we've been looking at the book of Jonah, and where we finished up last week in the final message there, we were kind of thinking about two things and reflecting across the book about two themes in particular that had kind of echoed there. And the first was that Jonah, more than a book about a big fish, is actually a book about a big God, and it exists to shine a light onto him and to help us understand a little better who he is. And then also that Jonah, more than a book about a kind of funny, silly man who kind of runs around doing silly, funny stuff, doesn't do what God wants him to do. It's a book that actually is holding up a mirror to us, and that if we look in it uncomfortably, we might see a little bit more of ourselves than we'd otherwise hope to. And so both of those themes in Jonah, in reflection, are kind of themes which are present across the entirety of Scripture as well. The Bible, it shines a big spotlight on God, and it helps us to see who God is. And it also holds a mirror up to us, and it helps us to see ourselves as we are as well, and all of the amazingness and all of the yuckiness that we sometimes are, and it invites us into a better way of being. And so we've kind of got a pretty exciting Sunday in a couple of Sundays' time. We have the potential of a couple of baptisms happening in this service at the end of the holidays, which I'm pretty excited about. And Carolyn and I were having a chat, and we were thinking, well, what could we do over these next couple of weeks to kind of help lead us into that? And so we thought, well, how about we pick up those themes that were there at the end of Jonah? How about we pick up this theme of how does the Bible kind of shine a spotlight on God and help us to see who God is? And then how does the Bible help us to see ourselves as we are? And then when we get to the third week, we might be in a good place to kind of come together and celebrate some baptisms there. So that's kind of where we're tracking over the next couple of Sundays. Obviously, there's so much that we could cover on the subject of God, and kind of 15 minutes here this morning is not going to be doing it justice, because the Bible uses a lot of language to talk about God. And I wonder, question, maybe just have a quick chat with the person next to you. Can you think of some words that the Bible uses to describe God? Just a quick 30-second chat. Okay, let's hear them. Let's start shouting them out. What are some of the different words that the Bible uses to describe God? Can you give me some? Creator, yep, awesome. Good, yep. Almighty, yep. Yep. Merciful, yeah. Kind, yeah. Yep, you can just shout them out. Slow to anger, yeah. Jehovah Jireh and just, yep. King of all kings, yep. Justice, yep. Holy and Messiah, whoa, yeah. I heard that one. So I went a little bit more literal on my list, and this is not exhaustive, but it kind of, we got creator though. Harmon's was top of the list there. God is described as a mother in Isaiah 46, a father in Malachi, a husband in Hosea, a shepherd in Psalms, judge, lawgiver, we got king, Isaiah 33, a teacher in Isaiah 28, a farmer in Isaiah 5, a mother bird in Ruth, a stone, a fortress, a fountain of living waters. Again, not an exhaustive list. And I guess these are helpful words to help describe certain attributes of who God is and the different contexts that we find them. They're ways of trying to find language to say this is kind of like what God is like. And they can be really, really helpful in those contexts, but they can also, I guess it kind of, the thought struck me that they can also be unhelpful sometimes as well. Because, like, what happens if we think about God as like a mother or a father, and then sometimes our own mummies and daddies, and this is certainly not any of the mummies and daddies in this room, what if those mummies and daddies get tired and grumpy sometimes? Or what if we have a teacher, and this is certainly none of the teachers in this room, and they teach us the wrong thing. They say that 1 + 1 = 3, and they're insisting that 1 + 1 = 3, or that you spell cat K-A-D instead of C-A-T. Or what if we think, God is a fortress and we think about big, strong buildings, but then we've been to different places around the world and we've seen the ways in which as buildings get older and older and older, they start to fall down when they get old and tired. Sometimes the words that we use about God, they can be really helpful, but also they can be unhelpful because we all have experiences of some of those ideas in different ways, and our different experiences can give us the wrong idea about who God is. A couple of years back in Big Kids Church again, we were doing a series in Exodus, and Exodus is the story of God's amazing rescue of his people from slavery in Egypt. But once they're rescued by God, the thing is that these people, they don't really know exactly what God is like. Like, they've got stories of God from their whakapapa that have been handed down over generations, but they don't really know God. And there's one particular bit in the story once they've left Egypt. God asks their leader Moses to come up a mountain to talk to him for a while. And meanwhile, down the bottom of the mountain, the people decide they're going to put on a bit of kind of like a worship festival, a bit of an Easter camp type situation down there. And they're so excited that they get all of their gold jewelry and they melt it down and they make an image of a calf. And they're saying, this is the image of the gods who took us out of slavery in Egypt. And they bow down to it and they sacrifice to it and all of this stuff. And God isn't happy about any of it. And it seems really silly, right? Like, God has just rescued them. So why are they doing all of this? Why would they make an image of another God and worship it? But the thing is in the story is they're not really making an image of another God. The reason that this happens is that they've been soaked in this context in Egypt where they've been surrounded by a worldview about who the gods are and how they're worshipped. The nations around them, similar as well. There's this kind of polytheistic kind of way of viewing God, which has kind of leached in to their identity as well. And so they think, well, this is the way that we do things. But they're wrong. They've tried to worship God in the way that the gods around them are being worshipped, but their idea of who God is kind of a little bit mixed up. It's just like if God is a mummy or daddy, but our mummies or daddies make mistakes, or like if God is a teacher, but our teacher says that 1 + 1 = 3. Sometimes our experience of the world that we live in, the way that we are influenced by the things around us, can kind of get in the way. And it kind of continues to be the way of the story through the Old Testament. God's people, there's long periods where they don't do this, but there are long periods where they do. They start kind of taking cues from the people around them, from the world around them, and their ideas and the way that they live. It starts to show again that they don't really know who God is. And so we get these people sent kind of along the way to kind of try and draw the people back into who God is and to remind them of what they're forgetting. We get the prophets. In the time of Amos, an example this morning, that people are doing some kind of stink stuff. They're not living the right way or being kind to the people around them, but they're still coming into church every week, and their mixed up worship is reflecting their mixed up view of God. And this is God speaking through the prophet Amos. He says, I hate your holy feasts. I can't stand them. Your gatherings stink. That's pretty full on. Your gatherings stink. Take the noise of your songs away. I won't listen to the music of your harps. I want you to treat others fairly. So let fair treatment roll on just as a river does. Always do what is right. Let right living flow along like a stream that never runs dry. It doesn't matter that they're coming into the right temple. It doesn't matter that they're coming in and making all of the right sacrifices, all the right noises. The reality of their lives shows that they really are missing in terms of understanding who the God is that they are actually worshipping. And I guess left to ourselves, this would probably always be the case, because we are no better than any of these people that we read about all the way back in the Old Testament. And God knows this, and so he decides to do something about it. And the something is what was there in our call to worship this morning. And what I'd love if we could read a little bit of together, actually, off the screen again now. The start of the New Testament book of John. And so would you read this with me? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. And that might sound just a little bit kind of, but what John is trying to describe here is to put words to something that is actually almost impossible to describe. How the Creator God, the Mother, Father, Teacher, Fortress God, the God who was there before all things, who made all things, how that God decided to become flesh and blood and become like us and to walk among us. And because we have seen him, because we have seen Jesus, we have seen face to face what God is like. God has shown himself to us in a way that we can understand. There's actually another story in Exodus. I'm just kind of following on from that golden calf bit. Moses, he's hanging out with God and kind of says that, Moses and God are friends, which is pretty special. And he really wants to know a little bit more about what God is like. And so he asks God if he can see his glory, like the full glorious amazingness of who God is. And God says, no, like if you do that, Moses, you're not going to survive it. Like I'm too amazing. You're just, your head will explode if you do that. You won't be able to handle it. But he makes a deal with Moses and he hides Moses in a gap in between some rocks, and he covers Moses gently with his hand, and he passes by, and Moses is allowed to catch a glimpse of his back, but that's all. And it says that after Moses comes back from these encounters with God, even though he hasn't seen him properly, God's glory is shining so brightly off Moses' face that he kind of has to wear like a sack over his head when he's back down amongst the people, because his face is shining so brightly that they can't bear to look at him with the reflected glory of just a tiny glimpse of God. And so we have a story like that, and then we fast forward again back into John, and we have this announcement that we have seen his glory. When we see Jesus, we see what is unseeable. We see the face of God. We see what God is like. It's what Jesus says a little bit later on. He's having a chat with some of his disciples. Philip says to him, Lord, show us the Father, and that'll be enough for us. And Jesus says, don't you know me, Philip? Even after I've been among you for such a long time, anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. It's just this kind of like, I know it's just the stuff we talk about in church, eh? Like this is just the normal stuff, But hear it again this morning for what it is. This unbelievable, unimaginable kind of thing that has happened. What is unknowable and unseeable becomes knowable, and reach out and touch it, reality again in Jesus. And so, if to see Jesus is to see God, then, well, what is the God we see in Jesus like? Well, he's a son, he's a brother, he's a friend, he's really good at telling stories, he knows the Bible inside out, he loves kids, he hangs out with those that nobody else wants to. Sometimes he's the life of the party. He heals sick people. He gets grumpy when people are pretending at religion. He's got power over evil. He can tell winds to settle down and waves to be calm. He brings people back to life sometimes. He forgives sin. He's gracious and compassionate. He's angered by injustice. He's tearful when people are sad. He sees all people, no matter their race or their culture or their social standing, as equals before God. He believes in the best of who we are. And he also enters into the worst of who we are as well. Out of incredible love for us, Jesus is whipped and beaten and humiliated and nailed to a cross. He's abandoned to death. He's buried in a tomb, but then also raised to life, ascended to the throne of heaven. He holds the power over all things, and everything in us and in our world is being made right because all of this is true. And so if we want to know what God is like, then from a Christian perspective, the only way to do that is to shape everything that we know about God through Jesus. Colossians 2 says God's whole nature is living in Christ in human form. And then in Hebrews chapter 1, in the past, God spoke to our people through the prophets like Amos. He spoke at many times. He spoke in many different ways. But in these last days, he has spoken to us through his Son. The Son is the shining brightness of God's glory. He is the exact likeness of his being. And so I guess in closing, I want to say that this matters hugely for a couple of reasons. And I know that it's not breaking fresh ground for some of us, who've been around the church for a while this morning, but just hear it again. It matters firstly because looking to Jesus helps us to see God properly. Who is God? What is God like? Well, God is like Jesus. God is Jesus. And this is where the glasses bit kind of came in this morning, and I've been semi-distracted by that. Do you want to just stand up so everyone else can be distracted? It's great. Does anyone else want to stand up? Carolyn's done, those are some great glasses. Great glasses over on this side as well. Anyone else got some glasses that they'd like to? Oh, and even brought cool glasses to church this morning without even knowing that we were going to be doing glasses stuff. I guess the thought about the glasses is that, when we put on the glasses, it helps us to see a little bit better, and we can see a little bit more clearly what God is truly like when we see him through Jesus. Every time that we're kind of tempted to believe a lie about our own value or our worth before God, how might we better understand it through the lens of the God that we find in Jesus? When people are saying, well, God must be this, or God must be that, or God must think this, or God must think that, or when, we're looking out at our world and wondering, what is God doing about any of this stuff? Where is God in any of it? Well, we need to see clearly about it. And I guess the right prescription from the optometrist is Jesus. And it's important. It's really important. And it matters not just to kind of correct our perspective, to make sure simply that we're just kind of thinking the right things about God, but also because putting on the glasses, in a very real sense, they help us to see where we're going as well. Writer to the Hebrews a little later on in Hebrews 12 says, "Let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith." The image in this text is of a race that we're running, and we're all kind of running the race, whether we like it or not. We're running the race through life. We're running the race through different seasons, from one thing to the next, and the encouragement then is to run it well, to run it in the right direction. And the key that this text is kind of suggesting is to do that. We need to fix our eyes on Jesus, because there are lots of other ways to run the race. There are lots of other things to distract us and trip us up that we might not see if we're not looking correctly. There are other things that catch our attention and that we might, see the shiny thing over there and we want to be running towards that. And we find that actually the race is over here and we're somewhere off over there. We need something to fix our eyes on. Even the Christian world, even the church can be a place where keeping our eyes fixed on Jesus is not a given. There are so many things, even in spaces like this, that can become a distraction when we start talking about God in a generic term, God this and God that, like the music artists, the Grammys or whatever, getting up and thanking God, the generic God for kind of their wealth and their success. We can run the risk of misunderstanding who God is and misplacing him. And so we're better placed then to speak about Jesus, to fix our eyes on him. We can be in the same place, singing the same songs, doing the same stuff, but if Jesus isn't the central kind of focus, we can kind of be in the same place and believing fundamentally different things. And so, I guess, as a setup for these next couple of weeks, hear it again. Scripture calls us back to God and shines a massive spotlight onto Jesus at the heart of all of it. And so I'm wondering two things this morning. Are there stories about God that you are holding on to? Are there beliefs about who God is that at a deep and kind of fundamental level are helping to shape and define something of who you are? Are there things that you're believing that need to be tested again this morning through the lens of Jesus? I wonder, how might your labels be getting in the way of the reality of who God is? How might you be challenged just to simply pause and to reconsider some of that again today? And secondly, if it is Jesus who is the center of all of this, how are you carving out space to fix your mind, your eyes, your heart again on him? How are you allowing space for your vision to be filled with him? Because it requires a conscious effort to turn and look. We talk about those disciplines sometimes of kind of reading the Bible and praying and, gathering with others along the journey, and we kind of think, those are good things to do, but they aren't merely good things. Those are formative things. Those are things that help to shape us. They help us to set our eyes in the right direction, to look towards Jesus in a world which is screaming for us to be looking anywhere else. Jesus is all of it. He's everything. Jesus is the glory and the splendor of God. Jesus is the unseeable and the unknowable, who becomes a reach out and touch it reality for us. And it's Jesus who promises by his Spirit, if we will let him, to draw us closer to him, to help us in this space, to fix our eyes on him once again. Hear this verse one more time. Let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Let us fix our eyes again on Jesus, who is the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. Amen.